October 8, 1918, the Argonne Forest, northeastern France. 17 American soldiers are moving in single file through dense undergrowth, trying to flank a line of German machine gun positions. The forest is so thick that visibility drops to a few yards. The ground is churned mud. The air smells of cordite and rot. Then a German machine gun opens fire from the ridge above them. In 30 seconds, 9 of the 17 men are dead or dying. The sergeant is gone. So is the corporal in front. The surviving men dive for whatever cover they can find. Tree roots, shell craters, the bodies of the men beside them. When the shooting stops, the highest-ranking soldier still alive is a corporal named Alvin York, a 30-year-old farmer from a small hollow in the mountains of Tennessee, a man who, 8 months earlier, had tried everything in his power not to be here. He looks up at the German positions on the ridge. He counts the machine gun emplacements. He looks at the 8 men still alive around him. He looks back at the machine guns. Then he picks up his rifle. What happens next will be called by General John Pershing, commander of all American forces in Europe, the greatest individual military achievement of the entire First World War. What happens will result in one man single-handedly killing 28 enemy soldiers, capturing 132 prisoners, and silencing 35 machine gun positions that had been stopping an American advance for days. But to understand how a Tennessee farmer did that, you first have to understand why he almost didn't come at all. Alvin York was born on December 13, 1887 in Pall Mall, Tennessee, a community so small and so remote that it barely qualified as a town. His family lived in a 2-room log cabin. His father was a blacksmith who died young. His mother was left with 11 children and almost nothing. York grew up poor in the way that shapes everything. He had almost no formal schooling, perhaps a few months total in his entire childhood. What he had instead was the skills his environment demanded. He could hunt, he could farm, and by the time he was a teenager, he could shoot with an accuracy that impressed men who had been shooting their whole lives. In the mountains of Tennessee, marksmanship was not a hobby. It was how you fed your family. York grew up shooting squirrels and turkeys at distances and angles that would challenge trained military snipers. He competed in local turkey shoots, contests where marksmen fired at moving targets, and he won them regularly enough that other competitors stopped entering when they knew he was there. But York in his 20s was not the man history would remember. He drank, he fought, he gambled. He was involved in the barroom brawls that were common in the rough communities of rural Appalachia. When he was 27 years old, his closest friend was killed in a fight at a roadhouse, and something in York broke open. He walked into a revival meeting held by a small church called the Church of Christ in Christian Union, and he did not walk out the same man. The conversion was total. York stopped drinking overnight. He stopped fighting. He became deeply, seriously practiced in his faith, reading scripture, attending services, taking the moral teachings of his church not as guidelines but as laws. And the Church of Christ in Christian Union had a very clear teaching on one subject in particular. The taking of human life was wrong. In any circumstance, for any reason. Alvin York was a pacifist. When the United States entered the First World War in April 1917 and York received his draft notice, he did what his faith required. He applied for conscientious objector status. He filed the paperwork. He cited scripture. He made the case earnestly and carefully that his religious convictions made it impossible for him to serve in combat. His application was reviewed and denied. He was ordered to report for training with the 82nd Infantry Division, the division that would become known as the All-American Division, because it drew men from every state in the Union. York showed up, but he was not at peace with it. His company commander, Major George Edward Buxton, was an unusual man, educated, deeply religious himself, and genuinely interested in the conflict between York's faith and his duty. Instead of dismissing the concern, he sat down with York and went through the Bible with him, passage by passage, the Old Testament justifications for righteous war, the idea of fighting to protect the innocent, the passages that suggested moral responsibility could extend to action, not just abstention. They talked for days. York went alone to a mountain, literally by himself on a hillside outside camp, and prayed for 3 days. He came back with an answer. He would go. Not because he had stopped believing that killing was wrong, but because he had decided that the obligation to protect his fellow soldiers and the people they were fighting for outweighed his own comfort. He did not want to be a soldier. He had decided to be one anyway. The distinction would matter enormously in the months ahead. By September 1918, the war in France had reached a critical phase. For 4 years, the Western Front had barely moved. Hundreds of miles of trenches from the English Channel to the Swiss border, and millions of men dead for gains measured in hundreds of yards. But in the summer of 1918, the German army was finally breaking. The Americans had arrived in force, their divisions fresh and enormous, and the Allies were pushing hard along the entire front. The meuse-argonne offensive, launched on September 26, 1918, was the largest military operation in American history. 1.2 million American soldiers. 47 days of continuous fighting across some of the most difficult terrain on the Western Front. Dense forest, steep ridges, deep ravines, and a German defensive network that had been fortified and resupplied for 4 years. York's unit, the 328th Infantry Regiment of the 82nd Division, was assigned to attack through the Argonne Forest itself. The forest was a nightmare. The trees were so close together that artillery support was nearly useless. Visibility was measured in yards. The Germans had positioned machine gun nests at overlapping angles on the ridgelines, so that any advance through the valley below was swept from multiple directions simultaneously. Progress was measured in hundreds of yards per day, bought at enormous cost. On the morning of October 8th, York's battalion was ordered to advance and capture a rail line behind the German positions. His platoon was given a specific mission: swing around the left flank of the German line, get behind the machine gun positions and take them out from the rear. 17 men, single file, moving through dense forest toward German lines they could not see. They found a gap and slipped through. They moved deeper than expected, and then suddenly they stumbled onto something unexpected: a cluster of German officers and soldiers, including several senior commanders, resting in a clearing well behind the main line. The Americans had accidentally penetrated far deeper than planned. They opened fire. The Germans, caught completely off guard, surrendered immediately. The Americans had captured perhaps 30 prisoners and several officers without a shot being fired in return. But the celebration lasted less than 15 seconds. The machine gun crews on the ridge above had heard the commotion. They swung their guns around and fired down into the clearing. 9 Americans died in the first burst of fire. The sergeant and the 2 leading corporals were gone instantly. The surviving men scattered into whatever cover existed. The German prisoners hit the ground. Chaos. York found himself lying behind a slight rise in the ground, looking up at the ridge. The machine gun positions were above him and to his left, perhaps 25 yards away, firing down the line. The Germans in the clearing were not shooting, partly because their own prisoners were in the line of fire. York did the only thing that made sense to him. He started shooting back. His marksmanship from 30 years of hunting in the Tennessee mountains was not a learned military skill. It was reflex. He knew exactly how to lead a moving target, how to account for distance and angle, how to breathe and squeeze rather than pull. He had been doing this since he was 12 years old. He worked his way through the German positions methodically. The Germans on the ridge were trained soldiers, but they were firing at a suppressed, nearly invisible target in dense undergrowth, while simultaneously managing prisoners and trying to maintain their own positions. York had one problem: the machine guns in front of him. He focused entirely on that problem. When a group of 6 German soldiers fixed bayonets and charged down the ridge toward him, he did something that sounds impossible until you understand how he had practiced it. He shot them in reverse order, starting with the man at the back and working forward. His reasoning was the same logic a hunter uses when flushing turkeys out of a tree. If you shoot the bird at the front first, the ones behind see it fall and scatter. But if you take the back ones first, the ones at the front don't know what's happening behind them. He killed all 6 before the first man reached him. At some point during the firefight, German Major Paul Jürgen Vollmer rose from behind cover and shouted to York in English. He had studied in Chicago before the war. "If you don't kill any more, I'll make them surrender." York considered this. "All right," he said. "I'll treat you like gentlemen." Vollmer blew his whistle. German soldiers up and down the ridge began laying down their weapons. York organized his 8 surviving men, put the prisoners in a column, and marched them back toward American lines. As they moved other German positions they passed, seeing the column of prisoners and not fully understanding what had happened, also surrendered rather than risk being surrounded. By the time York reached American lines, he had 132 German prisoners, including several officers, and had neutralized 35 machine gun positions that had been blocking the American advance for days. A private first class who met the column at the American line counted the prisoners and turned to York in disbelief. "York," he said, "have you taken the whole German army?" York looked at the column. He looked back at the private. "I sure have, Minana," he said. "And them's all that's left." Within hours of returning to American lines, the story had begun to spread. York was promoted to sergeant on the spot. His battalion commander investigated the scene and came back shaking his head. The official army report confirmed what seemed impossible. One man with a standard infantry rifle and a pistol had killed 28 enemy soldiers, wounded many more, captured 132 prisoners, and silenced 35 machine gun nests in roughly 30 minutes. General John Pershing, who had commanded American forces through 4 years of industrial slaughter, reviewed the report and said simply that York had accomplished the greatest thing done by any private soldier of all the armies of Europe. Marshal Ferdinand Foch, supreme commander of all Allied forces, a man who had overseen every major operation of the war, called it the most remarkable individual feat of the war. York received the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, the French Croix de Guerre, and decorations from multiple Allied nations. He was promoted and celebrated and treated as the greatest American hero of the war. He returned to Tennessee on May 29, 1919, to a parade through Nashville. He was offered enormous sums, movie contracts, endorsement deals, speaking tours, a book deal worth more money than his family had seen in generations. He turned down almost all of it. He had not gone to France to be famous. He had gone because he decided he had to. He came home for the same reason he had left, because it was the right thing to do. He accepted a farm given to him by the grateful people of Tennessee and went back to the life he had always wanted, working the land, raising his family, attending his church. But one offer he did not turn down was the chance to do something for his community. York had grown up with almost no education, in a county where the nearest school was miles away, and most children, like him, received only a few months of formal learning in their entire lives. He used his fame to lobby the state of Tennessee and private donors for years, until he had raised enough money to build a proper school, the York Agricultural Institute in Fentress County. He ran it, supported it, and devoted decades of his life to making sure the children of his county had the opportunity he never did. The 1941 film Sergeant York, starring Gary Cooper, won the Academy Award for Best Actor and became one of the highest-grossing films of its era. York himself cooperated with the production reluctantly, only agreeing when he was persuaded that a film showing the moral wrestling behind his service might inspire others. He asked that Gary Cooper play him. Cooper won the Oscar. York spent the last years of his life in poor health, struggling with financial problems and the complexities of his fame. He died on September 2, 1964, at the age of 76. He is buried near his home in Pall Mall, in the mountains he never really left. The man who had tried not to go to war is remembered as one of the greatest soldiers who ever served in one. Here is the thing about Alvin York that most people miss entirely. He was not a hero because he was fearless. He was not a hero because he wanted glory. He was not even a hero because he was the best shot in his county. He was a hero because, when the moment came, he had nothing left to protect except the people beside him. Every person who seeks heroism, who wants to be seen as brave, who imagines themselves performing under pressure, carries a weight into the crisis that York did not carry. They are managing two things at once, the situation in front of them and their own narrative. Am I doing this right? Will people think I was brave? What happens to me if this goes wrong? York had already resolved all of that. Before he ever set foot in France, he had made his peace with the worst outcome. He had sat on a mountain and accepted that he might die. He had decided that his obligation to others outweighed his own survival. There was nothing left to protect. When the machine guns opened fire and 9 men died in 30 seconds, York did not freeze. Not because he wasn't afraid, but because the fear had no grip on him. He had already done the hard work. The crisis did not ask him to decide who he was. He already knew. Psychologists who study performance under extreme stress have found something counterintuitive. The people who perform best in genuine crises are rarely the ones who trained hardest to be heroes. They are the ones who had, before the crisis, fully accepted the worst possible outcome and decided to act anyway. The acceptance removes the hesitation. The hesitation is what gets people killed. Alvin York didn't go to France to be Sergeant York. He went because he decided he had to. He did what he did not to become something, but because in that moment, with 9 men dead and 8 still alive, there was simply nothing else to do. That is the paradox of the reluctant hero. The person least interested in being extraordinary is often the one most capable of it, because they are the only one in the room not thinking about themselves.